Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening for a very special live presentation of the new feature documentary, A Thousand Cuts. Tonight's film is offered courtesy of PBS Distribution and will be followed by a Q&A with writer, director, producer Ramona Diaz. This film was released nationally in virtual cinemas on August 7th, so please make sure to get the word out about its release online. The film runs about 100 minutes, and after the film ends, we'll go directly into the Q&A with Ramona. So please stick around for the discussion to follow, and thank you so much for joining. I'm sorry.
No problem.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because there's been some discussion of the demographics of Facebook and Twitter and how economically they're doing things that they think appeal to the people who use their platform. So you see, sort of a more progressive wing of Twitter users starting to help Twitter make better decisions. And in Facebook, they discovered that there was actually quite a large conservative contingent, and therefore they have no economic interest in making the right decision. I'm curious if you're seeing that as well. I mean, because those are just two platforms, but if at the end of the day, any good decision made by social media is purely economics, or if there is actually a social value component to these things with the CEOs.
They're belatedly realizing that if they don't protect the public sphere, that they will wreck the governance systems, that they will wreck democracy. I think that realization has happened. In our case, it's Facebook is number one. 100% of Filipinos on the internet are on Facebook. That is our internet. YouTube is number two. Twitter is number three, right? And in terms of the social media platforms I use, Twitter gives greater protection to those on the front line. They actually actively do that. And part of that is because they have, well, actually, the social media platforms have hired people who understand human rights, who understand journalism. It's whether or not they have power to do anything about it, right? And what we've seen is Twitter, and you can see this both in Hong Kong. Twitter raised the alarm about Chinese attacks on the activists in Hong Kong, and then Facebook also helped. So Twitter raised the alarm. They took down these networks. This was a while ago. Twitter has taken down content. Facebook is lagging behind significantly since it is the world's largest distributor of news. Think about it like this, right? The way the social media platforms are designed distributes lies laced with anger and hate faster and further than facts. You heard me say this in the film. I have been saying it a million times, since 2016. I've learned so much about this. Facts don't stand a chance. Journalists became journalists because we spend our lives learning to tell stories to make you care about facts. And all of a sudden, someone can lie, emotionally manipulate you, and their message spreads faster and further than us. Winston Churchill's old quote, that's old. We don't even get pants anymore, I mean, it is. So without facts, how can you have integrity of markets? How can you have integrity of elections in a health issue, right? Here's the upside, I think. The silver lining is during the time of COVID in a pandemic, all the social media platforms started acting like gatekeepers. They started taking lies down, right? It took a pandemic because at a time when lies kill, they're part of it as well. So they started taking the lies down. Why can't they do that for political disinformation? They should. And I think that's opened the floodgates. I think we should make sure they do that.
Ramona, can you talk a little bit about the origin of the film in terms of, there are different threads that you follow throughout with various political campaigns as well. And you know, what the process was of connecting with Maria and being able to tell her story, but also the story of journalism writ large.
Yeah, I mean, I was drawn to, I found myself at the end of 2017 in the Philippines because I was drawn to the drug war, right? I had this sort of nebulous idea to make a film about the drug war. And then I got to Manila and realized that a lot of people had the same idea. And a lot of people have since made, right? They've come out with films about the drug war. So I looked around. I wanted to see if there was something else. I knew I wanted to make a film in the Philippines during the time of Duterte. You know, I was born, I was raised under martial law. I'm a martial law baby. So, and there was something about Duterte being elected president that seemed to take us back to a time that wasn't a very good time under the Marcoses. You know, he had that kind of, especially because of the drug war. It was horrific. The numbers were rising, bodies in the streets. That was really crazy, right? So that's why I knew there was a story there. And I thought it was a drug war. And then there was Maria, and not that she doesn't like when I say she was the loudest voice against the president. She was not, but she and Rappler were questioning the drug war. They were questioning impunity, and they were questioning the numbers, because there was a big discrepancy between the government official numbers and the human rights organization numbers, right? The government, they were saying it was like 4,000. It was more like 27,000. Big discrepancy, but no matter what, right? 4,000 is still a big number. It's a crazy number that the government has admitted to. So, but more than that, she was also talking about disinformation and connecting the drug war and impunity with disinformation. She was talking about weaponizing the social media. She'd been talking about it since 2016. The very first article she wrote for Rappler was in 2016, when very few people were talking about it. So I thought it made it a more global story, you know, very still specifically Philippines, but a global story. So it allowed me to tell the story of Duterte, but also zoom out and make it more relevant. And so that's why I think it resonates in this country. It resonates elsewhere because of the disinformation and social media and all that. So that's how. And then we met in 2018, and I started filming her in 2018. And then through 2019, through the midterm elections.
Maria, what was it that made you want to be the center focus of this film? You know, obviously Ramona has a tremendous body of work to speak for her, but it's obviously an extra level of, you know, coordination in your work to have another set of cameras.
Before I met Ramona, before Ramona asked if she could follow us, I already felt something was happening that was different. You know, by next year, I'll have been a journalist for 35 years. I'm old, and I have never been through anything like this. I've gone through war zones. I've, you know, through South Asia, Southeast Asia. This was different. And the 1,000 cuts, where that comes from Al-Qaeda. You know, I talked about that because that was Al-Qaeda's strategy. It is to make you bleed to death, right? To make the West bleed to death. And AQAP, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, actually published that in its Inspire magazine. Anyway, so when Ramona came and asked if she could, first I reminded her she turned me down for an interview in 2004. That was when I was CNN, for the record, right? and then the second was I then tried to gauge her, who she was, and I think three things. You know, the first is she's Filipino American. She has a body of work, and then the third thing is gauging her. You know, what is her does she have word of honor? What does that mean? Because I don't want to do this to a lot of groups, but I wanted someone independent to document what was happening, because it's alarming. And when you're the group, Rappler small, we have a total of about 100 people. Our editorial folks is about 25 people. And we're focused on the story. We're focused on holding power to account. Throwing in that extra thing of like having to deal with the story of ourselves is difficult. So having her there was perfect, but she passed every single test, and she's very stubborn, which is also good. It's a good trait in a journalist. And I think, who knows where this is all going to end? It's still going on, right? And I don't know what will happen, but I know it is the battle of our lives, right?
Certainly.
And we've got to win it. That's the just because you're facing tremendous power doesn't mean you give up, because what you do will matter. And then to have an independent party making sure, shine the light, right? Making sure that every aspect is chronicled, that's important.
Let me ask you this, because this is the big difference I find in terms of the support that Duterte has versus the support that Trump has, which is that here we have a very polarized society, but let's say without the tricks of electoral college and everything else that's going on, he's a very unpopular president. Whereas Duterte does seem to have a large popular support. And does that in some ways make it even that much more terrifying? Because he says what he's going to do, does it, and then his base loves it.
My view on this is not the popular view. I think that the manipulation at mass scale is the root of a lot of this. President Duterte was elected with about 39% of the vote. It's not a majority. And his actions, if you look at performance of the last 4 years, doesn't actually inspire anything other than the regionalism that's constantly sparked, us against them. That is how he leads. Plus you throw in violence and fear. And then the last part is, why would businessmen want to ally themselves with President Duterte? Because of power. Up until COVID, I would say it was, the government used 3 C's: corrupt, coerce, co-opt. Since the lockdown, which for us began, he announced it on March 12th. Since that has happened, the administration has to, like the Trump administration, has to actually perform. Mm-hmm. And the performance has been dismal so far. President Duterte, like Bolsonaro in Brazil, appointed ex-military generals, former military generals, to lead our response in a public health crisis, and it hasn't worked. So this is something. But I guess the short answer is, hard to tell what the numbers really are, especially post-COVID. What the government has done is to consolidate power during the times that we've been in lockdown. The largest broadcaster, ABS-CBN, has been shut down. And if this had happened at a time when people are out in the streets, there would have been mass protests. Obviously there's still mass protests in other parts of the world, but in the Philippines, we have curfews. You have to be in your home by 8 p.m. There are barricades, and our president has actually told the police that if you break quarantine rules, he said this April 1, because it wasn't an April Fool's joke. He told the troops, shoot them dead. That's a direct quote, right? So it is, that's a long answer to the popularity. I think a lot of it is manufactured consensus. I think that Filipinos are finding their voice in a life and death situation. But it's tough right now to figure out where this will lead. But we've been here before. I guess that's the other part. The Philippines, when I first came back in 1986, the Philippines sparked global movements for democracy around the world after the 1986 People Power Revolt. Ramona lived through this, right? It's funny because we just switched our geographical roles, but it's back to the future. I do know in the end that we're on the right side of history. So that's why I also face down the court cases, because President Duterte is the most powerful leader this country has ever known. I would say he's more powerful than Marcos. He claimed this himself. He said that he was able to shut down the largest broadcaster, to take the power away from the Lopez family without declaring martial law. That's correct. He owns it, right? So I would say, the other big difference between your country and mine is that our institutions collapsed within the first 6 months. You have institutions that are still fighting, and now you're beginning to feel the first of what happens when the executive pushes the boundaries of its power to co-opt others, right? And your test is going to be, will they stand up against it? Can they move fast enough? Since the processes of governance are so much slower than the thinking fast impact of the person in power using that vast power and traditional media, and the underground, bottom-up, exponential speed of social media, right? Don't downplay this threat. It is huge.
Yeah, I believe you. I'm curious, Ramona, what it was like for you to be filming at some of these rallies for the politicians associating themselves with Duterte, because you must be seeing in real time. I mean, you must be, in some ways, I'm curious if you're also somewhat shielded because you're following some of these politicians. I mean, what was that like?
Absolutely. I think we were not hiding, right? And also the president knew I was filming because we needed special permission to actually film in the pit, right? We were very close to him during those rallies. And sometimes we were on stage with General Bato and Mocha. And that required special permission. So they knew we were, well, I followed Bato also for some time. So they were aware we were shooting, we weren't hiding. Every time Maria got arrested, we were on television with her. I mean, we were very visible, and I think that protected us. I think if we were doing it under the radar or secretly, that would have been scarier. But they knew, because I had to go through the proper channels to get those special permission, which they gave to us, right? So I think that was I think it was a smarter thing to do.
And does having made this film now put you in a similar form of jeopardy?
I haven't tested it yet. I haven't been back home since they've seen the film, so we'll see. It's unknown. I know. Maria goes, "Come here, come on." I'm like, no. I'll wait it out here. So we'll see. Maria, you have to go. See, I'm her timekeeper. She has something, because I begged her to come on for like a few, but I know she has like something to prep for at 10.
I do have to go. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you for coming on. Even, it's great. See you later.
I should have asked this while she was.
Sorry.
Oh, no. I'm happy to ask you because it's a bit about like doc filmmaker and protagonist.
Right.
And one of my absolute favorite moments in this film is when her sister is sort of showing her this dress, and it's just such a wonderful moment within a film that has a lot of really hard truths about our reality, about how the state of things are, and yet you find a really human moment that's really charming and really intimate. And I'm curious a little bit about how much at what point did you decide to put that in there in that moment to take us away from all of the really intense parts of the story?
When we edit, I've only had one. Leah Marino has edited all my films. We collaborate on all my films. And what we really do is we make lists of what we call golden and silver film scenes, right? We have the golden scenes, the silver scenes. And that's where we start. We don't really actually start at the beginning of the film. We go to the best scenes that we love. And those two, what we call the sister scenes, were always a favorite. How can it not be? Because it gives you an into Maria that's different, that's more intimate, that's more, that's warm, and informal. And you cannot not use that, right? That's a no-brainer. So we knew that was in. That was like a golden scene, because we only picked like our top 10. That was like my top 10. It was also in her top 10, right? Because she picks her own top 10, I pick my own top 10, and then we compare. And I think it's key because you see her in all these very public events, right? Giving all these speeches and winning awards. And of course, we are with her in the car. And when she's thinking about, of course, I have to go home. That's silly. I have to stand up. But you don't ever see her in a more like it's a crazy moment of choosing a dress, for heaven's sake. But I think that, there's so much in that scene that's about Maria, like saying, no, I'm not going to wear that dress. I mean, it's such a, it also reminds you that, oh my God, she's a sister. She's a sister also, right? She's part of a family. She's part of this network of she can be your sister, right? She's Time Person of the Year, but she can also be your best friend, your sister. And I think that's key. That's always important, I think, in a film. I always try to get those moments.
So let's pivot a bit to talk about the sequence of the film that's chronicling Bato's political campaign. How did you start that conversation with him, and what was his impression of what you were making?
I was very honest with all of them. Like, Maria knew I was filming Mocha and Bato. Bato knew I was filming Maria and Mocha. So I approached both Mocha and Bato through formal means, through the formal channels. I wrote them a letter, and I called and called and called. They were also familiar with my previous work, so I'm not an unknown entity in the Philippines. Some of my films have, really had big place there. He was familiar with Imelda. He was familiar with the Arnel Pineda film.
Yes.
Yeah, right. So he was also at that point about to give up being the chief of the Bureau of Corrections, being the chief of the head of prisons, to run for Senate. And he understands the power of narrative. So does Mocha, right? So, and being familiar with my previous work, they knew, and I was being very honest. I'm like, I'm also filming Maria, and Samir Gutok, the opposition. I think that was, to him, like, transparency, I think, is key, right? And I wanted my pitch to him was, I want to know what your story is. I want to know why you're an ally of the president. I want to know what you think of the president, and where does his loyalty come from? All that, going beyond the sort of the imagery of Bato. And I think because he was familiar with my previous work, and because I was really honest, and because he was running, and he understood too that I played to a bigger audience beyond the Philippines, right? Although I make my film, say I produce it here, so I'm always playing to an audience that is beyond the country. It's really I try to decode what's happening there to a Western audience. And that was the same with Mocha as well. And Mocha even more so, because she really understands the power of the image, right? And she really understands, she's also very performative. I mean, she is a performer. She liked my Imelda film and saw herself, like, there were many times where we were filming her and she was always filming herself, right? With her camera, with her iPhone. Many times where she turned the iPhone to the crew and me and saying, look who's filming me. She filmed Imelda and now she's filming me. So she likes sort of being elevated to, like, now being, the filmmaker who made Imelda is now filming me. So that's why they said yes.
And did they feel like the film in its final version was honest about their experiences?
I do not know, because I know they've seen it. So in the Philippines, we screened it for 24 hours for free, right before Maria was, her first verdict for cyber libel came down June 15th. So very, very last minute, we said, let's open it up. Let's offer it for free, geo-block to the Philippines for 24 hours, just to raise awareness for her verdict that was coming down on Monday. And this was on the Frontline channel, Frontline YouTube channel. And Frontline told me, sure, great, let's do it. And it was such a quick decision that they said, with no advance notice, we'll probably get average maybe 20,000, maybe even less, because average traffic on YouTube for Frontline is like 40,000 with advance notice. I said, that's fine, 20,000 to be, people aware of Maria's verdict, that's good. I think, that's still doing its job. Yeah, let's do it. Oh my God, it was like 233,000 full views in 24 hours. It was insane. And there was something about it that really hit the zeitgeist that weekend. And I heard over the 24 hours that they had seen it and they wanted to talk to me about it, but they were okay with it. And I could see why they'd be okay with it. Right, because I went beyond just their caricature of Mocha, right? We talked about her personal history and why she's really loyal to the president. And that's what I wanted to get at, because someone always has a story, right? No one is ever an anti-hero in their own personal narrative. So I wanted to know why they saw themselves as like a hero, or what the story was. What was the real story? And but it's just blind loyalty because they came of age together in Davao, that he would, like he says, he would kill for the president. That's it. It's blind loyalty. They're friends. They're brothers. And that's Bato's story.
In the wake of all of that online success, did you find that there was an influx of the same kind of fake accounts trying to bring the film down?
Oh, we got a lot of trolls. We got very trolled. But I think the voices that were not for the film, the angry voices at what was happening. But it was interesting because Alex, it was a mixture of anger and sadness. Mm-hmm. Like it was ennui, right? That because we fought so hard to build institutions after the revolution, that people felt like, how are we in this place again? It's like we took our eyes off the ball. What happened, right? So suddenly people were woke, but it wasn't something, this was something happening. This was not an expose, right? And usually my films play there differently. They all say, oh, we know that already. Why is that a film? When really, I'm like, yeah, it's really not. It's really for the bigger audience. But this time there was also compounded by the fact that they were in lockdown, right? There's this sort of heaviness already. So I think the sadness, and I got a lot of messages from strangers over the 24 hours of sadness, despair, what do we do, anger. Anger I expected, but not the deep, deep sadness, the deep regrets. It was deep regrets, which I couldn't take. It was such a heavy weekend for me. And then, of course, I had to face Maria's verdict that Monday. Oh, my God, what a long weekend. But I think the problem is now there's no one to harness all that energy, no one to harness the anger and regret, because there is no major opposition leader. I mean, he or she has not emerged yet. I always say it's early days. Maybe he or she will emerge, but that's what's needed, an opposition leader.
So Ramona, I want to start bringing on some people who have asked questions, and okay. I'm going to do this in a way that allows them to actually turn on their camera if they want to.
Oh, that's great.
And I'll bring them over. So just give me a second here. I'd like to welcome over Joaquim Josef Mendoza, who is a newly admitted film and TV production student from the Philippines.
Wow.
So
that's pretty cool.
And for everyone that I call on, you're welcome to turn on your video and when I move you over to the panelist side.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Hi. So yes. Sorry.
Oh, you're still in Manila?
I'm still in Manila. I couldn't make it to LA because of the COVID. I do have. I guess before I start with my question, I just wanted to say thank you for telling the story of Rappler and what's going on here in the Philippines. I grew up in Davao City. That's where Duterte came from. And I saw firsthand the kind of culture of apathy he tried to distill on us. And Bato, Bongo were like figures throughout my childhood. So, yeah. And also, Miss Ramona, I read your interview that you said you looked up to Direct Mary Ludia Sabaya, and she was the one who pushed me to do film, actually.
Fantastic.
So I'm here because of her. I guess for my question, I have had so many questions, but I guess for me, as someone who wants to also explore this topic while I'm there in USC, is how do I even begin to have that courage? Or how do I even begin to tell that story that is so complicated? And you're fighting a very powerful and authoritarian government. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
When I start a film, especially a documentary, it's all, for me, I call it explorations. I have many ideas. I could have gone at it so many ways, but I really believe on being on the ground for a long time and observing and listening to people and seeing what's really happening. Because I don't think you can helicopter in. You really have to stay. So whenever I start a film, in my head, I'm moving back to the Philippines. Like I moved in 2018 in April. Yeah, in April, I was in the Philippines, expecting to stay there for as long as was needed to get to find the story. And I really just talked to a lot of people, and I listen and observe. And basically, and this is not usually talked about in documentary, but it is what we do. I cast the film because it is the medium that has to. The people in the film still have to hold the film, right? They still have to, what they say, catch the light, right? It's still casting. So I'm casting. I'm talking to a lot of people, but I'm casting. And to me, Bato and Mocha were obvious, right? They emerge. And then when I met Maria, I was like, oh my goodness, of course, Maria. She lights up a room, right? There has to be some kind, the quality in a person. And then, of course, then she's fighting the government. It's like catching lightning in a bottle. So I think if you observe long enough, if you stay long enough, talk to people will emerge that you can. But you also, I listen to my intuition a lot. I've been doing this a long time as well. So you have to trust your intuition. You have to trust this like gut instinct of what will work. But really do your homework before you ever even start filming, and talk and stay and find your story. And then if you find yourself in the crosshairs too, because the person you're following is in the crosshairs of the president, then you have to decide what your tolerance for risk is. And the most important thing for me was the local crew, because I had to protect them and I had to give them the option, especially when it was obvious that Maria was so much in the crosshairs of the president that we might also be, and they would stay and I'd leave. So I gave them the option of actually leaving the project without any prejudice. I said, I will not take it against you if you walk away right now. But all of them stayed. I mean, they all stayed and said, no, this is it's the right story to tell. It was very, it was so humbling. It was so amazing. And then for me and my other crew, it's like, what is your risk, and are you willing to take it? That's all. What is your tolerance for risk? I think I would always have regretted if I didn't make the story. Sorry, I have to plug in because I'm losing power.
Oh, no worries.
I would always regret it, right? I mean, there's no way I cannot not tell, it's right in front of me. I had to tell the story. And then you just embrace the risk. It's there. You just embrace it and say, let's go. Let's do it. It's like realizing you're in a war zone and saying, should I stay or should I go? I'm a documentary filmmaker, so I stay. I hope that I answered. I know it's a long-winded answer to your question.
No, it was really good. Thank you so much.
And good luck. Congratulations. That's great. You're going to go to USC. That's fantastic.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, let me welcome over Jessica. Okay, you're on our side, Jessica.
Hey, Jessica.
Hey guys. Actually, Kaz and Jessica, we love the documentary. Jessica just ran off here. But the question remains, it's kind of exactly what you were talking about there. And I kind of wonder what it's like to maintain an unbiased position on the truth with the government being so specifically targeting this kind of campaign to just tell the truth. How do you maintain, Maria would probably be able to answer that as well. How do you maintain the line, hold the line, as we heard so many times in the film? How do you hold the line given the specific attack against you?
You mean hold the line for like objectivity, or hold the line for
democracy and truth, and not turn the journalism into us against them, which they've made it very clear it's us against them, and you have to maintain that level of neutrality in telling the story as it is.
And I won't speak for Maria because she is a journalist, so she doesn't see herself as the opposition. She sees herself as a journalist um, uh, uh, holding power accountable, right? That's what the fourth estate does. That's why they're so important. But as a documentary filmmaker, neutrality has never been my intention, right? Because I work in a medium that resists neutrality, right? It's film. My very choice of Maria, my very choice of Mocha and Bato already is saying something. My choice of making Maria like emerge as in the hierarchy of characters, right? She's the main character, is already like me choosing for you to gaze upon her longer than the other characters. So I think film, I'm giving you a mediated experience in film. So it can't ever be objective. It can't ever be neutral. It resists neutrality. Just the very nature of the medium, of the format of film. So that's never my intention. My intention really is to give you an experience of what it's like to be there during elections and being Maria. My intention is to walk in the shoes of Maria for a while, for whatever, 98 minutes. My only my contract with the audience is that I will never tell a lie. I will never put words in people's mouths, take things out of context. That I won't do. That is my contract, you know, because it's a documentary. Will I change things around for chronology, for dramatic structure? Absolutely, yes. But I will never take things out of context. I will never change like the emotional truth of the scene. No, that will remain true to the intention of the characters, to what they said, and to context, to what was happening around them.
Well, thank you for that. And I will say that it presented as such. It presented as fair. Whatever your biases may be or however they may come across it, it was fair.
It was fair. Okay. Wait, no, I'm just curious. When you say it was fair to the president, it was fair to...
Sure, I think, you know, and this is, my situatedness is, you know, being an American in Los Angeles and a Black man and then things I've gone through. But as I look at what I'm after in my own life, and this is getting a little bit existential, but the truth of it is there, and these are the words that were said. And to your point about not changing what it means or how it's felt or any of those things, this is what it is. And for us, it's our job to make something of it. And my own humble estimation is, this is the truth of it. This is fair.
Okay, that's great. Yes, it's all about, that's why I'm not very prescriptive when it comes to messages, because I think messages are informed by your lived experience, your personal history. So it's not to me about a message. I don't think that's what film does best. Actually, messages are not, right? Experiences are. Like taking you, engulfing and immersing you into this kind of other world. That's what I think film does best.
Agreed. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for watching.
Before we go to Melanie, I just wanted to say for anyone who's raising your hand with the hand raise function, can you actually just plop your question in the Q&A box instead, and we'll try and call on you. Okay, Melanie, over to you.
Hi, Ramona. I'm a big fan. I'm really, really excited. My palms are sweaty and my heart's beating. I'm just so glad you're here, and thank you for taking the time. I also grew up in Manila, and I just graduated from USC this summer. So I hope to be able to do documentaries just like you. The interesting thing about documentaries is you shoot things as they happen. So I was just wondering, with this documentary in particular, when did you realize that you had enough footage or you had enough events to create a feature-length documentary? And if you want to be more specific about it, what was the last scene or event that you shot for this? I think just be really interesting.
The last scene really literally was Christmas of 2019. And then I sent a crew out for her verdict. I sent a local crew out to shoot the verdict because we added that at the end, the coda. But for most of my films, I like having what I call containers, like events that are the backdrop, so I know when to begin and when to end. I don't like this shooting documentaries forever, right? Not knowing when to end, that drives me nuts. So in my head, like, for example, previous films, the learning, I filmed teachers their first year in America. So the first year, that was a container of the film. For the Journey film, it was Arnell's first tour with a band. That was the summer. For here, it was the midterm elections. I wanted to begin and end with the midterm elections. But it just so happened that Maria's story paralleled with the elections, right? Because a few days after campaigning began, she got arrested. Again, and arrested. I mean, you couldn't write that, right? I could never have, I couldn't have written that. It's really like catching lightning in a bottle. And you realize, you know, when I started filming, I still had this idea of having it more like a very ensemble cast, I call it the Robert Altman-esque film, you know? But as Maria really emerged, so your center of gravity sort of changes and you have to follow that. You know, it presents itself. So when that was quite obvious, I had 2 units on the ground and 1 unit just stuck to Maria. It was, of course, a leap of faith, right? But I knew she was the story. I mean, I knew she would emerge as the major protagonist. So one unit, I said, just stay with Maria, and then the other one would roam around the country with Mocha, with Bato, with Samira Gutok. So it was a decision made as the story was unfolding. You have to follow it. It's very Zen-like. It's a very Zen-like kind of filming. It's a crazy way to film, but I think that's exciting. I love the process. I always say if I knew how it ended, I'd be doing fiction. That's not to turn on fiction. I'm doing fiction next, so I'm really excited to do fiction. But that's, to me, the excitement of documentaries. You don't know where it's going to go. And you're just like, okay, maybe, and sometimes you make the wrong decision, right? Sometimes you follow something and something else happened here that was more exciting, but you have to forget, because then that will, you know, sort of paralyze you. You have to forget it ever happened. No one will ever know. And then you move on.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
And congratulations again.
Oh, thank you. And to you as well. Congrats.
Okay, we have Srika.
Hey, you're mute.
Hi. Hi. Firstly, I love the documentary so much. I'm a business of cinematic arts student. I'm also a writer for the Daily Trojan. I was wondering if you were to tell your viewers before they were to enter this whole experience, what is that one piece of information you would give? One piece of information that would clearly state your perspective and your purpose, because we find this parallel between the United States and the Philippines, and because it's such a global audience. What is that one piece of information you'd like to give them before they enter this viewing experience?
So basically the question is, what is the film about, right? What is that one thing that I want to tell?
More, yes. More of how you would like them to view it, because we know that there are extremes. What is that one way that you could neutrally view it?
I think it is about the erosion of democracy because of the weaponization of social media, and how social media weaponized affects democracy. So that's a big theme. I always like to work in big themes, so that's a big theme of the film. But it's not an investigative journal. It's so funny when people see, now I'm answering more, but when people know it's about a journalist, they always say, oh, it's an investigative film. It really isn't, right? So it's more immersive. It's an immersive look at a journalist who is trying to fight power. Or maybe that's what I want to say. I don't know. I change all the time. It's hard. But to me, disinformation and the erosion of democracy, and that the connectivity of that, you know, I think is key, because that's what's happening everywhere.
Thank you.
I hope I answered your question.
You did. But is it more of a story of Maria, or is it more of a story of Philippines?
I think it's both. It's a story about the Philippines told through Maria's experience. It's always parallel. I think it's always that parallel story.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, we have Ella up next.
Hey, Ella.
Hey, how's it going? Good. I just had a quick question. So a couple of journalists in the documentary mentioned how they kind of carried this guilt and grief of the mothers who lost their sons in the drug war. And I think that's a pattern that's kind of traditional journalists. They're really empathetic people, a lot of them are. So they just kind of become attached. But do you, as a director observing these events and capturing them, did you feel that same sense of guilt and grief? And if so, how did you cope with that?
You mean with the people I film, right?
Yes, yeah.
No, I get very attached to the people I film. This is the thing. Sometimes I don't know when to stop. I like, again, going back to, I filmed some teachers in the learning, and I'm still in touch with them. They're still my friends. They become my friends. Like Maria, right now, she's my friend now. And also because I feel, of all the people I filmed, Maria has been closest to me, and like we have a kinship, I think. And I always say I would have been her friend even if I didn't film her. But I do not have those boundaries, because after the film is done, I remain in their lives, they remain in my life. I think because as a documentary filmmaker, I form a different relationship with them. They really have to trust me, because what I'm asking is to be in their life constantly. I don't think anyone would say yes if they knew what it was I really wanted. They say yes because they think, they'll be, they'll come in and out. No, I am in your life, right? Like I say, I'll never say yes to me, because knowing what I want, I wouldn't say yes to me. I feel such empathy with them. And I like being in touch. I think the relationship should continue, but I don't have those journalistic, I'm not a journalist. I don't see myself as a journalist. So I don't have those boundaries. I don't have I don't ever stop. I still keep in touch, because I think it's important. They're part of your life. And hopefully I'm part of theirs as well. Because when you're filming them, it's a very transactional relationship, right? You want something from them. At some point they want something from you. At some point they want to tell you their story. So it is transactional. But after you put down the camera, it becomes something else. It becomes a real relationship. And that's nice. And I like that. I like having them in my life, and hopefully they like having me in theirs.
Okay, let's go over to Jin.
Hi, Ramona. Thank you so much.
Hi.
Thank you so much for this film. It was really amazing. My initial question, actually, you already answered, which was basically like how you got access to so many different types of people and what you had to like pitch to them. So you already answered that. So my second question, which is kind of like a follow-up of that, is once they see the film, how do you think it would change their lives, like whether positive or negative? And is there some impact campaign or impact goals you have in terms of like how the film could be used to do what? Or like what do you see the film being used for in terms of change? And specifically for Maria, how is this film either like benefiting her, I guess, or is it creating more backlash?
So I can't answer for Maria, but I believe this film, if it keeps her story in the news, in the limelight, it helps her. Because there is that kind of protection, because she has a global voice. She has a global audience. And the administration realizes that. I think that then that gives her some kind of protection. So that, to me, is it's what we have to do with this film. It's just to keep her story alive. And it's also the story of not only one Maria, many Marias in this world. I mean, there are a lot of journalists being incarcerated, attacked. It's a thing that's happening. So not only Maria, but beyond Maria, journalists as a whole. So I think that's the impact campaign we should have. And also to start talking about disinformation and what do you do? What can you actually do as a person, right? You have to be an active participant, I think, in as a consumer of news. You can't just be passive. What was your other question?
Well, yeah, just kind of like how the film would change any or all of the protagonists' lives? Like
Always, this is more, I guess, very goes beyond. It's like this philosophical question in documentaries. Does your very presence change the situation with a camera? I think it does already to begin with. There is what they call the observer effect, right? That the person you're observing will all forever be changed just by you filming them. And then does it then make the documentary more legitimate? I think it does. It will always affect it. But rather than not telling the story, I'd rather be there and tell the story in some fashion. When people watch the film, no matter how media savvy they are, right? No matter how, like Maria was the face of CNN Southeast Asia for a long time. So she was used to seeing herself, but she had never seen herself in this way, where she has a scene with her sisters and all that. I think no matter how media savvy you are, and then you see yourself writ large, it always does something to you. It's like, oh my God, I went through that. We flew out the entire Rappler team, the founders and the 3 reporters, to Sundance, to the premiere. They saw it with they had seen it before, just them, right? But seeing it with an audience in a theater writ large, they're like, then it's almost like you don't recognize yourself, because they were like, oh my God, what we went through was horrific. I'm like, yeah, it was horrific. You almost see yourself as this other person, you detach from it. It's very interesting. I think it does in some fashion, but my very presence, I think, changes it already. I believe so. There's some debate in the documentary world and whether it does or not. I believe it does.
Well, that other question I had was like, the people who've watched this film, do you feel like they're, like you said, that there was like a kind of an awakening? Sort of like, do you think there's a chance to mobilize that sense of awakening into action to do something?
I believe so, but like I was saying, you need to harness it. You need to harness the anger, the energy. There is an opposition vice president. She needs to be supported more. And I think with a lot of support, there has to be this one person they can rally around. And some say, well, maybe it's Maria. No, Maria's a journalist. She'll always be a journalist. She will not be that opposition leader. But there has to be that. I think because that kind of anger and disappointment, it peters away, right? People forget, especially in lockdown. It's a very strict lockdown. There's danger of being arrested, so that energy peters away. And for any movement to be effective, you have to harness it immediately and then organize, right? There's no organization behind it, and that's what's missing. But then that might emerge from all the anger and frustration.
Thank you, Ramona.
So we're hopeful.
For everyone out there who's very confused by that concept of the opposition vice president, explain just a little bit about how that actually functions in Filipino elections.
Yeah. So there are no just 2 parties, right? So you can vote you vote the president and the vice president separately. So you can vote them from separate tickets. So Duterte won from the PDP Laban, I think is his party, and the president Leni Robredo is from another party. She's from the opposition party. So the vice president and president can be from different parties. Just like there were 5 candidates, and that's why when Maria said he only won by 39,000, what was it? 39% of the vote, because there were 5. You can never win by a landslide because there are 5. There were, I think, 4 or 5 candidates. It's not two party. It's not a 2-party system.
Okay, so I'm going to call on one last guest, but before we do that, I want to pass along a question from David Magdale, who probably doesn't want me to force him onto camera. Can you talk about the female Filipino hip hop artist who did the theme song?
Oh my God, Ruby Ibarra! Don't you love her? Okay, so I met Ruby, and she's very interesting actually, because she is by day biotechnician. She's a scientist by day, trying to find a cure for COVID, a vaccine for COVID by day. By night, she is this Filipino rapper. It's amazing. So I love Ruby to begin with. But I met her at Rappler, actually, in the Philippines, because they were there, they were performing, and then they were Rappler invites artists to come and perform in their studio. That's how I met her. And she was singing this amazing song. I think it was Balik Bayan. And I was just blown away. So when we were rushing the film for Sundance, I said, who do I want? There must be someone I want to sing out, to sing the theme song. And I thought of Ruby. And, oh my God, Alex, we were rushing this film for Sundance like crazy. We have like a 10 to 11 months editing post schedule. We had, I think, 4 months to cut it because we got into a Sundance. And when you get into Sundance, you rush, right? And it was over Christmas, and I reached out to her, and she just said, oh yeah, I'm gonna do it. I'm like, okay, but I need it like next week. She goes, send me the film, I'll do it. And she did it over the weekend, over Christmas weekend. So we spoke to her on Friday. By Monday, she had a version of the film, which is very close to what it was, very close. We just tweaked some lyrics, and that was it. And then added a chorus and added some other stuff, and we had a song. And she did it so quickly. She's kick-ass. Ruby Ibarra, she's amazing.
I hope she's as good finding the cure for COVID.
No, she might be. So see, fingers crossed. She might be. That's what she does.
Did the film change at all after Sundance?
It was 2 hours at Sundance, and we cut it down to 98 minutes. So yes, it did change. And of course, the end at Sundance, it ended at the Christmas scene. So it was about love and hope, which I wanted because I think that mirrors Maria's optimism. I wanted it to mirror her optimism, but because she was found guilty, we needed to add the coda, which completely changes the ending, right? It completely pivots the ending, which is it's interesting, but that's what happened, and we wanted to include it.
Okay, let's take one last one. I just welcomed over Jean. Jean, if you're out there.
Hey, Jean.
Hi.
Hi.
What a treat to just hear about your process and the way you approach the film. Like, the film itself is so incredible, but it's so just like, I'm here saying amen to every single responses you've been given. So I'm so thankful for your time. And I'm a documentary filmmaker. I'm an editor. And to hear that you filmed or made this in 4 months is like blowing my mind, because I've worked on films and it takes years sometimes to get the story right. So I'm really curious how you approached structuring the film from beginning to end. Like there's so many stories and layers to tell. The story of the country, the government, the different people involved, and there's big themes and how you work those in, and what was your approach and philosophy when, I mean, there are no rules to storytelling, but there are maybe some things that you use. Yeah, so I'm curious to hear about those.
So I always look for context that will make it a cinematic, kinetic film, right? I always think, of form, right? It has to be cinematic. It has to be and kinetic. Things have to happen in that way. And so when the midterm elections were coming up, I knew that had to be the backdrop, because politicians in their everyday life, it's really boring, right? What happens in that? But when they're campaigning, it's interesting. And I knew Philippine elections are so unique because they're full of spectacle and entertainment and singing, dancing, karaoke. So I already knew, okay, that's going to be the backdrop, because then it will give it this sort of very kinetic feel and this sort of really like a beat and rhythm to the film that will propel it forward. So you choose something that isn't just like your character walking down the street, right? Because usually, what is that about? But if they're campaigning, and especially like a character like Bato, say, to me, what was very interesting about him was he was this juxtaposition of both jester and such a menacing jester, right? Because he's singing, he's dancing, he's doing karaoke. But then if you don't clap, then you're a drug addict, right? This is sort of threat, right? And I love that juxtaposition because, he can come and hurt you if he wanted to, but he can also sing and dance. And I knew that sort of tension would come out in elections. So you choose a backdrop that will give your film propulsion. So that was the first thing. And with that, and then Maria, I knew Maria was going to cover the election, but I knew she was going to call truth to power, right? I knew she was going to shine the light, but who knew she was going to be personally affected by, because she was arrested twice. She was, and they were really coming after her personally. Of course, it's not a gift. I mean, I don't wish it on anyone, but as a storyteller, right? Like I said, you can't make that up. So, it just comes, it emerges. If you really have to be, it's an active listening and observing. It's very tiring because you have to be completely 100% there. And I always say the time you spend not shooting is as important as the time you spend shooting, because it's like my cinematographer described it as like being on safari. You can go out for days and not see the animals, but the 20 minutes that you see the animals is like golden. So we can sit around and nothing really happens, but the last 30 minutes of the day, boom, she gets arrested. That's it, right? I mean, that's a bad, or you know what I'm saying? Or boom, Muka talks about her father, right? I mean, you're like, oh my God. So that's worth it. It's worth it because think of the ratio. You only need 98 minutes. I mean, right? You only need I mean, that's still a long time, but I mean, we're shooting for days and days and days with 2 units, sometimes 3. It's a lot of hours. You don't really, you don't really need that much, but you need the right stuff. I'm not sure I answered your question, but it's really a lot of luck as well as knowing where to be, and really, and also good collaborators. I worked very closely with my editor. I data dump on her. I call her all the time. I said, oh my God, these characters are great, blah, blah, blah. I just data dump. And then she knows what to look for. And then she calls me, this is really interesting. This is not playing. You think it's playing, but it isn't. Go, this is interesting. Go, what's happening there? I'm interested in that. And then I have long, lengthy conversations with my cinematographers, because I tell them exactly what I want, the look, right? Where to be, how to be. And some cinematographers don't like comms in their ear, walkie-talkies. If you don't want, then I can't hire you, because I have to be constantly talking. And also I'm translating, right? So, because they don't speak the language. But you have to be comfortable with comms in your ear, so I can constantly be, okay. And then I have a monitor, right? And I'm like, okay, you should be here. And sometimes I pull them. They have to be comfortable with that. And it's a constant evaluation at night. What did you see? What's working? What are the themes that are coming up? Like the theme in the film of screens, right? Big screens behind people, big screens always of Duterte and all that. That was the theme. So we try to capture that more, because the themes, visual themes, arise as you film. Because it's a documentary, you can't really, you can guess at it, because you observe, but you can't, once it happens a lot of times, then you start making that like intentional, the framing and all.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for watching.
Before we let you go, Ramona, how can people recommend this film in terms of where to see it?
So we are out of virtual cinema, which means that you can go to the website. So go to 1000cuts.film. And on the website, there are a list of like 60 theaters across the nation. So depending on where you live, you can click on one of those theaters, and you're basically supporting that theater. And they're mostly art houses. So choose a film, like in LA, it's Lemley, right? A lot of, yeah. So if you choose a theater you want to support, you buy a ticket from them and you can watch at home. Basically, that's what virtual cinema is. So we're out in virtual cinemas right now.
Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's so great to see you. I'm still like, I cannot believe we had Maria on this call. Thank you for making that happen.
Yeah. And whenever she can, she does it, because she knows it's important. And yeah, she's very supportive of the film. And yeah, I'm glad she was able to make it.
Oh, I'm sorry. Right before we go, Srika is asking if we can type the website So you said it was 1000cuts.film?
Yes. 1000cuts.film, yeah.
Okay, perfect. And Tribeca, if you don't get that down in time, hit me up later. Ramona, congratulations, and I really hope to see you sometime soon on campus.
Right? Yes, me too, Alex. I miss everyone at the American Film Showcase.
No, we just did a virtual orientation on film rights, and how that's going to work. And I'm like, oh.
I'm in the middle of doing a workshop with 10 African filmmakers. We started today.
Fantastic.
Yes.
That's
yeah.
so great.
I miss it though, because we could have been in South Africa, the park reserve.
I know.
Well, whatever, whatever we can do right now.
Well, thanks again.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having us.
Absolutely.
And screening the film. I really appreciate it.
Anytime, seriously. So yes, hopefully see you again soon.
Yeah. Bye. Good night.
Good night, everyone.